Emma Carter thought she knew exactly what she signed up for. Take care of Sophie Bennett, keep things professional, and stay far away from the ruthless, untouchable CEO, Ethan Bennett. But one night changed everything. A moment of exhaustion, a sleeping child, and a twist of fate landed her in the one place she never should have been, his bed. And when Ethan found them there, his reaction wasn't anger. It was something else, something dangerous. Ethan Bennett had spent years mastering control, keeping his world locked behind steel walls. Love, family. Those weren't things men like him had time for, until Emma shattered his carefully built life. She wasn't just another employee, she was temptation wrapped in quiet defiance. A woman who didn't fear him, who challenged him in ways no one else dared. He could have sent her away. Instead, he asked her to stay, but staying came at a cost. The media saw scandal, his enemies saw weakness, and the people from his past saw an opportunity. Suddenly, Emma wasn't just the nanny. She was a target. His ex-fiancée returned, whispering poison in the boardroom. His daughter's mother resurfaced, demanding custody. And through it all, Ethan found himself fighting a battle he never expected, to keep the two people who had become his entire world. Emma knew falling for Ethan was reckless, but the way he looked at her made it impossible to resist. He was possessive, obsessive, a man who would burn the world down before letting her go. But how could she trust a man who had spent his life avoiding love? How could she believe in a future when his past was trying to tear them apart? And when the storm hit, when secrets were exposed and betrayals cut deep, would their love be strong enough to survive? She had been just the nanny, a temporary presence in his life. But now, she was his weakness, his addiction, the woman he couldn't live without, and no matter how much the world tried to tear them apart, Ethan Bennett wasn't letting her go. Emma Carter never intended to cross boundaries. She was here to care for Sophie Bennett, nothing more, but as the little girl clung to her, her tiny fingers fisting Emma's shirt, she knew leaving her alone wasn't an option. Just until she falls asleep, Emma whispered to herself, settling into the plush bed. She told herself she'd wake up and slip out before anyone noticed, but exhaustion had other plans. The penthouse was eerily silent, the absence of Ethan Bennett, Sophie's powerful and elusive father, looming over them. Emma had worked for wealthy families before, but this was different. She had never met a man more emotionally absent than Ethan. Always working, always distant, as if his own home was a place he merely passed through. It was Sophie who suffered for it, and that knowledge stung. Hours later, the sound of the front door opening stirred Emma from sleep. She blinked, confused for a moment, until she realized where she was, where Sophie was. In Ethan Bennett's bed. Panic surged through her veins as heavy footsteps approached. Too late to move, too late to explain. She barely had time to sit up before he appeared in the doorway, looming, unreadable. Ethan stilled at the sight before him. Sophie curled up, her tiny hands gripping Emma's sleeve. And Emma herself tangled in his sheets, half asleep, looking soft and out of place in the darkness of his world. His first instinct was to demand an explanation, to remind her that no one occupied this space but him. But something about the sight disarmed him. Something about it felt right. Emma scrambled upright, her face heating. Mr. Bennett, she wouldn't settle, and She fumbled for words, expecting sharp disapproval. Instead, Ethan exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Relax," he muttered. "I'm not angry." His voice was gruff, edged with exhaustion. That alone shocked her. He didn't seem like a man who admitted weakness. And yet here he was, standing before her, looking tired. The air between them grew heavy, a charged silence stretching as Ethan's gaze flickered between her and Sophie. Then, to Emma's absolute confusion, his lips parted with something unexpected. "Stay!" One word, not a command, not a request, something else entirely. Emma swallowed hard. Everything about this situation screamed danger, yet, against her better judgment, she nodded. As Ethan moved to sit beside them, careful not to wake Sophie. Emma found herself watching him in a new light. This was the man the world called ruthless, the obsessed CEO who built an empire from nothing. But in this moment, he wasn't any of those things. He was just a man looking at his daughter, as if realizing, maybe for the first time, how much of her life he had already missed. Ethan had spent years controlling everything: his company, his image, his emotions. But standing in his bedroom, watching Emma and Sophie asleep in his bed, something inside him cracked. He should have been furious. This was his private space. A line had been crossed, and yet the sight of them together, so natural, so unguarded, unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Emma jolted awake, heart hammering as she registered his presence. She braced for the storm, the clipped tone, the cold reprimand. Instead, Ethan simply exhaled, rubbing the tension from his temples. "Stay," he murmured, as if the word had escaped before he could stop it. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Stay," she echoed, unsure she had heard correctly. He nodded once. "Just for tonight." His own words surprised him. Ethan Bennett didn't do vulnerability, didn't invite people in, but seeing Sophie so at peace, her small fingers still gripping Emma's sleeve, made him hesitate. The guilt gnawed at him. How many nights had his daughter fallen asleep waiting for him? He had built an empire, but at what cost? Sophie needed more than his name. She needed him. Emma swallowed, trying to ignore the way Ethan's presence filled the room. He was always so controlled, so precise, but right now he looked lost. "She talks about you all the time," Emma found herself saying softly. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't ask for details, but the weight of what he had missed settled between them. He had been failing his daughter in ways he hadn't even realized. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Sophie, his fingers brushing against her hair. A simple gesture, but Emma saw the struggle in it. This wasn't a man who didn't care. This was a man who didn't know how to show it. The realization shifted something inside her. Ethan Bennett wasn't cold. He was guarded. And maybe, just maybe, he was tired of being alone. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Emma forced herself to look away, to pretend this wasn't dangerous territory. She was here for Sophie, not for the man who suddenly seemed far too human. "Good night, Mr. Bennett," she whispered, lying back down. Ethan didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Good night, Emma," as the city skyline glittered beyond the penthouse windows. One undeniable truth hung between them. This had been a mistake, a small, intimate moment that neither of them should have allowed. But as Ethan watched Emma settle back beside his daughter, he realized something even more dangerous. He didn't regret it, not even a little. Ethan sat in his office, the city lights casting long shadows as he stared at his desk. A framed picture of Sophie sat beside stacks of contracts, a painful contrast between what he had built and what he had neglected. He had spent years securing his empire, ensuring Sophie would never want for anything. But last night, watching her sleep beside Emma, he realized money wasn't what she needed. Emma saw the change almost immediately. Sophie, once hesitant about her father's presence, began seeking him out. "Will Daddy be home tonight?" she asked, hope bright in her eyes. The question twisted in Emma's chest. Sophie wasn't asking for gifts, lavish trips, or expensive toys. She was asking for time, for something Ethan had never given freely before, and now he had no choice but to face it. One evening, Emma found Sophie waiting by the front door, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. Ethan had promised to be home early. He was late. Again, Sophie yawned, fighting sleep, but refused to leave her spot. She still believed in him. Emma wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. And when Ethan finally walked through the door, his gaze landed on Sophie, and the guilt hit hard. She brightened instantly. "Daddy!" she squealed. Running to him, Ethan crouched, catching her in his arms, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside him. "You waited up for me," he murmured, his voice rough. Sophie nodded sleepily. I wanted to say goodnight." Emma watched, heart aching as Ethan held his daughter tighter, as if realizing just how much he had to make up for. That night, he stayed. He sat beside Sophie as she colored, listened as she talked about school, let her climb onto his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, and to Emma's surprise, he didn't check his phone once. Sophie beamed, completely unaware that this was new for him, that he was learning how to be present. But Emma noticed, and for the first time, she let herself hope. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that stunned even himself. He cancelled his meetings. The entire day was spent with Sophie, filled with cookie baking, pillow forts, and movie marathons. Emma caught glimpses of him, laughing. Playful, human. This wasn't the ruthless CEO the world feared. This was the father Sophie had always deserved, and it made Emma's heart ache in ways she wasn't ready to admit. But happiness was fragile. The moment Emma picked up the morning paper, her stomach dropped. Victoria Sterling was back, and if Emma knew anything about Ethan's ex-fiancée, she wasn't here for a friendly visit. She was here to destroy everything. Ethan recognized the name immediately. Victoria Sterling. It had been years since their engagement ended, years since he had last seen her, and yet there she was, plastered across business headlines, her return perfectly timed. He knew Victoria too well. She didn't make moves without a reason, and if she was back, it wasn't for nostalgia. It was for power. His power. Emma noticed Ethan's shift the moment he read the news. He was distracted, tense, his usual sharp focus dulled by something she couldn't yet name. Sophie felt it too. "Is Daddy mad?" she whispered to Emma, confusion in her wide eyes. Emma forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "No, sweetheart, he's just busy." But deep down she knew something was coming, and it wouldn't be good. The first strike came when Victoria arrived at Ethan's office, all designer silk and calculated charm. "You look good, Ethan," she purred, crossing her legs like she still belonged there. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "What do you want, Victoria?" She sighed dramatically. "Is that any way to greet an old fiancé?" He didn't bite. He knew better. Victoria never came without an agenda. Emma met Victoria 2 days later. By accident, or so it seemed, the woman arrived at the penthouse unannounced, stepping inside like she owned the place. Her gaze swept over Emma dismissively before landing on Sophie. "Oh, how she's grown," Victoria mused, fake sweetness dripping from her tone. Emma stiffened. "Can I help you?" Victoria's smirk was sharp. "I was just curious about the nanny my ex seems so attached to." Ethan walked in before Emma could respond, his expression thunderous. "Victoria, you don't walk into my home uninvited." She merely smiled, unfazed. "Come now, Ethan. We're practically family." Emma saw the flicker of tension in his jaw, the kind that only came with history. Whatever Victoria wanted, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Victoria Sterling and Ethan Bennett, rekindling the romance. Emma's stomach twisted as she read the media had spun a single meeting into a full-blown reconciliation story. Ethan slammed the paper down, eyes flashing with rage. "This is exactly what she wanted," he muttered. "Control, leverage, and as Emma feared, she wasn't the only one after it, because later that night a second headline broke, one that hit even harder. Ethan Bennett's ex returns, and so does the mother of his child. Emma's breath caught. Olivia Hayes, Sophie's biological mother, was back, and this time she wasn't alone. She was coming for custody. Ethan had built $1 billion empire by predicting every move before it happened. But this had blindsided him. Victoria's scheming behind the scenes was expected, but Olivia's return, that was war. She hadn't seen Sophie in years, hadn't sent letters, hadn't cared, and now suddenly she wanted to play the devoted mother. He wasn't buying it. Emma watched as Ethan buried himself in legal meetings, phone calls, and damage control. But something was different this time, before he had fought for his company. Now he was fighting for his daughter. He spent more time at home, more time with Sophie, as if proving to himself, to the world, that she was his, and no one would take her from him. And Emma, she was caught somewhere in between. One evening, Sophie crawled onto Ethan's lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, her voice small. Ethan stiffened. "Why would you think that?" Sophie hesitated. "Because everyone's talking about me now." The innocence in her voice shattered him. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Never! You're the best thing that ever happened to me." And for the first time, Emma saw it. Ethan wasn't just fighting custody, he was fighting guilt. It became clearer in the little moments, the way he started coming home earlier, how he stopped bringing work to the dinner table, the way he carried Sophie to bed when she fell asleep on the couch, the way he looked at Emma. He had been a man obsessed with power. Now he was obsessed with something far more terrifying, a life he could lose. But Victoria wasn't done. She thrived on control, and Ethan slipping through her fingers wasn't part of the plan. "You're distracted," she accused in a board meeting. "Your image is suffering." Ethan barely glanced up. "I don't care about my image." The room fell silent. Victoria scoffed. "So, you're willing to throw away everything for some nanny?" The challenge was clear, and Ethan's answer even clearer. "I'd throw away everything for my family." The words stunned even himself. He had spent his life running from attachments, keeping people at a distance. But Emma and Sophie weren't just people. They were his. And for the first time in years, he knew exactly where he stood. But just as he started believing he could have it all, the world fought back. Because the next morning, his worst fear became a reality. The court date was set. Sophie's custody battle was officially underway. The morning headlines were brutal. Billionaire CEO's secret affair. Is the nanny more than she seems? A single photo had sparked the wildfire. Emma and Ethan too close, his hand brushing her back as they spoke. It was innocent, but the world didn't see it that way. The media had turned her into a homewrecker, a gold digger, a woman using a child to trap a powerful man. Ethan stormed into his office, his jaw clenched as his PR team panicked. "We need a statement," one of them urged. "Deny everything." But Ethan wasn't interested in playing their game. His only concern was Emma. She hadn't signed up for this. He dialed her number, but she didn't pick up. His chest tightened. He had spent his life protecting his company. Now he had to protect her. Emma sat in Sophie's room, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the articles. They had dug into her past, her childhood, her finances, even old social media posts. Strangers were dissecting her life, questioning if she was good enough for Ethan. She had been invisible before him. Now she was a target. The worst part, this wasn't just about her, it was about Sophie too. Paparazzi swarmed the penthouse, cameras flashing. Sophie clung to Emma, frightened. "Why are they yelling?" she whimpered. Emma hugged her tightly. How could she explain to a 5-year-old that the world had turned her life into a spectacle? Before she could answer, the door swung open. Ethan stood there, furious. One look at Emma's tear-streaked face, and his patience snapped. Victoria, of course, saw an opportunity. "This is bad for business," she said smoothly. "You need to cut her loose before the board forces you to." Ethan's glare was ice. "You think I care about the board?" Victoria laughed. "If you don't, they'll make sure you regret it." She wasn't bluffing. If Ethan chose Emma, he risked everything. His company, his reputation, his power. That night, Ethan made his choice. At a press conference, he stood before the world. "Emma Carter is not a scandal. She is my daughter's caretaker. She is my family." The room erupted with questions, cameras flashing wildly. But Ethan wasn't finished. He met the press head-on, voice unyielding. "You want a story? Here it is. I love her, and if anyone has a problem with that, too bad." The words should have settled things. Instead, they made him a bigger target. The world wasn't done attacking them, and neither was Olivia, because while Ethan was defending Emma in the media, Olivia was preparing her next move, one that could take Sophie away forever. Ethan sat in the lawyer's office, his fists clenched as he scanned the legal documents. Olivia was suing for full custody. She claimed the media scandal had made Sophie's home environment unstable. It was a calculated move, perfectly timed to strike when Ethan was vulnerable, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He had built his empire through war, and this was the most personal battle yet. Emma could see the toll it was taking on him. He barely slept, barely ate, spending every waking moment preparing for the case. But the worst part, Sophie felt it. She wasn't her usual bubbly self. She clung to Emma, asking quiet, heartbreaking questions. "Do I have to go live with Mommy?" Emma didn't know what to say, because for the first time, she wasn't sure what the answer would be. The courtroom turned into a battlefield. Olivia played the role of the grieving mother perfectly, her tears well-timed, her voice trembling. "I regret leaving, Your Honor," she said. "I was young, scared, but I've changed, and I deserve a chance to be a mother." Ethan's lawyer countered with facts. Olivia's years of absence, her history of neglect, but the damage had been done. Then came the betrayal that no one saw coming. Ethan's most trusted lawyer, the man who had handled his affairs for years, was working for Victoria. Emma found the proof in a set of leaked emails. Victoria had orchestrated Olivia's return, paying off journalists, manipulating public perception, making Ethan look unstable. The custody case had never been about Sophie. It had been about destroying him. Ethan was furious, but he didn't have time for rage. He needed to win. If the court ruled against him, Sophie would be taken away. Emma had never seen him like this before, sharper, deadlier, a man with nothing left to lose. He gathered every resource, every legal expert, every ounce of power he had. This wasn't just a fight for his daughter, it was a fight for his family. But Victoria and Olivia weren't finished. The court demanded a full evaluation of Sophie's living conditions. Questioning everyone, including Emma, they twisted her role, making it seem inappropriate, calling her influence a distraction. Ethan was livid. "They want me to choose between my daughter and the woman I love," he growled. "They don't realize. I will never choose. They're both mine." But as the legal storm raged, Ethan made the hardest decision of his life. Emma and Sophie had to disappear. "You'll be safe in Vermont," he told Emma, pressing the keys to a private estate into her hand. She shook her head. "I don't want to run." His jaw tightened. "You're not running. You're surviving, and I'll bring you home the second I win." But deep down, Emma knew nothing was certain anymore. Emma's heart pounded as the black SUV sped through the darkened roads. Sophie clutched her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with confusion. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Emma forced a smile. "Somewhere safe, sweetheart," but the truth was she didn't feel safe. Ethan had sent them away to protect them, but leaving him behind felt like tearing a piece of herself away. The Vermont estate was beautiful, but suffocating, nestled deep in the mountains. It was miles from the chaos of New York. Security patrolled the grounds, ensuring no one got close, but isolation came with its own kind of fear. Every night, Emma lay awake, wondering what was happening back home. Was Ethan okay? Was he winning? Or was she waiting for a future that would never come? Sophie adjusted quickly, but the absence of her father was impossible to ignore. She asked about him constantly, leaving messages on his phone, drawing pictures of their family. "Why can't Daddy come?" she asked one evening. Emma swallowed hard. How could she explain that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes even the strongest man in the world couldn't fight everything at once? Meanwhile, Ethan was waging war. He dismantled Victoria's network, exposed the bribery, and fought Olivia's claims in court. But the loneliness was crushing. For the first time, his penthouse felt empty. His world had always been built on power, strategy, control. Now all he wanted was to come home, to a home that only existed because of Emma and Sophie. Nights in Vermont were the hardest. Emma would sit on the balcony, staring at the night sky, clutching her phone. No calls, no messages. She wanted to believe Ethan would fix everything, but doubt crept in. What if he lost? What if she never saw him again? What if, after all this, their love had been just another casualty of his war? Then one night, headlights cut through the darkness. Emma tensed, pulling Sophie close as the security team moved in. A man in a suit stepped out, holding an envelope. "This is from Mr. Bennett," he said simply, handing it over. Emma's fingers trembled as she tore it open, scanning the words. "I have what I need." "It's over, come home." Ethan strode into the courtroom, every step measured, every move calculated. This wasn't just about winning custody, it was about ending the war. Olivia sat across from him, her lawyer poised, Victoria watching from the gallery with a smirk. They thought they had him cornered. They had no idea what was coming, because Ethan Bennett had built his empire on strategy, and he never lost. The evidence was devastating. Bank records, phone logs, sworn testimonies, every dirty deal Victoria had made to manipulate the custody case. Ethan's voice was ice as he laid it all out. "You didn't come back for Sophie," he said. Looking Olivia in the eye, "You came back for a paycheck." The courtroom buzzed. Olivia paled. The weight of perjury, bribery, and fraud was crashing down on her. Olivia faltered, her carefully rehearsed defense unraveling. I wanted a second chance," she murmured weakly. Ethan didn't blink. "Then you should have taken it years ago." His lawyer slid a document across the table, a legal agreement forfeiting all parental claims. Olivia's hands trembled. If she signed, she'd lose all rights. If she didn't, she'd face criminal charges. Victoria, however, wasn't done. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed as court adjourned. "You'll always be the man who let a nanny ruin his career." Ethan's smirk was lethal. "You're right, Victoria." He turned to the press waiting outside. "Emma Carter isn't a scandal. She's the woman I love, and if that ruins me, so be it." The cameras flashed, capturing every word. The fallout was immediate. Victoria was forced to resign from the board, her reputation in tatters. Olivia disappeared from the public eye. Her custody battle over before it truly began, but Ethan didn't care about headlines. He only cared about one thing, getting back to Emma and Sophie. He had spent his life chasing power. Now he was running towards something else, home. When he arrived at the Vermont estate, Sophie spotted him first. "Daddy!" she shrieked, barreling into his arms. He lifted her, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, feeling whole for the first time in weeks. Then his gaze locked onto Emma. She stood frozen, uncertainty in her eyes. He closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face. "It's over," he murmured. "Come home with me." Emma swallowed hard, her fingers gripping his shirt. "Are you sure?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," when he kissed her. It wasn't just a declaration, it was proof. She hadn't just been the nanny, she had been the missing piece of his life all along. Ethan didn't waste another second. He packed their things, arranged the jet, and within hours, they were heading home. New York wasn't just a city, it was where their future waited. Sophie sat beside him, happily chattering about all the things they'd do together, but Emma was quiet, staring out the window. Ethan reached for her hand. "Tell me what you're thinking," she exhaled. "I'm scared this won't last." Back at the penthouse, everything felt different. It wasn't just a place anymore, it was a home. Sophie ran ahead, giggling, but Emma hesitated at the doorway. She had come back, but had she really let herself believe this could work? Ethan turned as if sensing her doubt. "I don't want you as Sophie's nanny anymore," he said, her heart clenched. "Then what do you want me to be?" His answer was simple. "My wife." The proposal wasn't grand, wasn't planned. It was raw, real, everything Emma hadn't dared to dream of. Ethan knelt in front of her, a velvet box in his palm, his expression unguarded. "I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter, but you matter. You and Sophie are my future." Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred when she whispered, "Yes," Sophie squealed, "we're a real family now." But love wasn't a fairy tale, and reality wasn't done testing them. The media still lurked, waiting for a crack in their perfect image. At their first public event, reporters swarmed. "Is this real? Did she trap you?" The questions were cruel. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled Emma against him and kissed her right there in front of the world. "She's mine," he declared, "and I don't care who knows it." His protectiveness wasn't about possession, it was about devotion. He shielded her from the worst, silenced the tabloids, and made sure the world saw Emma for who she was. Slowly, the narrative shifted. She wasn't a scandal anymore. She was the woman who had tamed the untouchable Ethan Bennett, and for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't care about winning. He had already won. Sophie thrived in their new reality, her laughter filling every corner of their home. Ethan had been a businessman, a CEO, a man obsessed with power. Now his greatest obsession was his family. Emma watched him with Sophie, her heart full. Once, she had been just the nanny. Now she was his fiancée, Sophie's mother in all the ways that mattered, and somehow it still didn't feel real. Then one night, as they curled up on the couch, Sophie made a bold announcement. "I want a baby brother." Emma choked on her tea, laughing. "Let's get through a wedding first, sweetheart." But Ethan smirked, pulling Emma close. "Or maybe not," he murmured against her ear. Emma gasped, her cheeks flushing. And just like that, the next chapter of their story had already begun. Emma stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her fingers trembling as she held the pregnancy test. Positive. Her breath hitched, she had suspected. But seeing the proof sent a rush of emotions through her. Excitement, fear, love. This wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore. Their family was growing, and nothing would ever be the same. She walked into the bedroom, finding Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through emails. He looked up, instantly alert. "What is it?" She bit her lip, then handed him the test for the first time. Ethan Bennett, CEO, billionaire, ruthless negotiator, was speechless. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "We're having a baby." His voice was rough with emotion. Emma nodded. He kissed her like she was his whole world. Sophie was over the moon. "I knew it," she squealed, bouncing excitedly. "I asked for a baby brother," Emma laughed, brushing a hand over her still flat stomach. "It might be a sister, you know." Sophie shook her head confidently. "Nope, it's a boy, trust me." Ethan chuckled, pulling both of them into his arms. "Guess we'll find out soon enough." Their little family was becoming something even bigger. Months passed, and Ethan became more protective than ever. He rearranged meetings to take Emma to her doctor's appointments, refused to let her lift a finger, and hovered constantly. "Ethan, I'm pregnant, not fragile," she teased. But he only smirked, his hand resting on her belly. "You're carrying my child. That makes you the most important person in the world." Emma rolled her eyes, but she secretly loved it. Their wedding was intimate, far from the media circus, close friends, family, and one very excited flower girl. As Emma walked down the aisle, Ethan's eyes never left her. "I didn't think love was for me," he admitted in his vows. "But you changed everything. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to be better, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Emma's tears fell freely. The day their son was born, Ethan held him with a kind of reverence Emma had never seen before. "He's perfect," he whispered. Pressing a kiss to her forehead, Sophie peeked over, grinning. "Told you it was a boy." Laughter filled the hospital room, love wrapping around them like a cocoon. Ethan had spent his life chasing power, control, success. But in this moment, he realized this was his greatest achievement as the years passed. Their love only deepened. Ethan remained the obsessed CEO, but now his greatest obsession was his family. Emma had once been just the nanny. Now she was his wife, the mother of his children, his home, and as he watched Sophie play with her little brother Emma laughing beside them, he knew he had everything he had ever wanted, and he would never let it go. Love isn't always neat. It doesn't follow rules or fit into carefully planned lives. Sometimes it crashes in unexpectedly. Like a billionaire CEO finding his world turned upside down by a nanny who was never supposed to matter, Ethan and Emma's story wasn't just about passion or power. It was about fighting for something real, something worth risking everything for, and in the end, love won. But what about you? Have you ever held back from something or someone because the risks felt too high? Maybe you've told yourself that love isn't meant for you, that your dreams are too impossible. But what if you're wrong? What if the thing you're running from is the very thing that could change your life? Ethan thought he had everything, but he didn't have what mattered until he took the risk. Think about the people in your life, the ones you push away, the ones you tell yourself don't matter. What if they do? What if, like Ethan, you're standing at the edge of something incredible, but fear is holding you back? Love, success, happiness, they all require one thing, the courage to fight for them. And if Ethan Bennett, a man who controlled everything, could take that leap, so can you now. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where love or life forced you to make an impossible choice? Would you risk everything for the person you love? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that will challenge, inspire, and maybe even change the way you see love. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't just the ones we read, they're the ones we dare to live.